Welcome back to Wisdom Unveiled. So glad to have you with us again. We're diving deep into Saadi and his wisdom.
That's right, yes, and this is episode 17.
17. Can you believe it? We've got a lot more to cover.
It's a journey.
It is. It really is a journey. And before we get started, just a quick note. This is a translation
Yes.
of conversations with Iranian philosophers. So there might be a few details that
Aren't totally clear.
Yeah, exactly. We just want to acknowledge that up front. And if anything doesn't seem quite right,
Let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
absolutely, your feedback is always welcome. Now, today we're talking about humility.
Oh, interesting.
And I know, right? You think humility, it's pretty straightforward.
Seems simple enough, yeah.
But with Saadi,
Never that simple.
never that simple.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes him so brilliant.
Absolutely. He challenges us.
He really does. What's fascinating to me is that he connects humility with arrogance.
Ah, the paradox.
The paradox,
Yeah.
right? I mean, usually we think of those as opposites,
Polar opposites, you'd think.
but Saadi sees them as intertwined somehow.
He reveals those hidden connections.
Now I have to know more. So where do we even begin with this?
Let's start with Saadi's imagery. He has this beautiful verse, right? From dust, God created you pure and free. So humble yourself, like dust my servant be.
I love that he uses dust.
So powerful, right?
It's like he's saying, we come from something so humble,
Grounded, pure.
and we should strive to be like that too.
To embody that essence of humility.
So it's not about putting ourselves down.
No, not at all.
It's about recognizing our place.
In the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. And you know what it makes me think of? Children.
Oh, I see what you mean.
They have this natural wonder about them.
That pure curiosity.
Yeah. They're not trying to control
They're
everything.
just open to experience.
And that's a form of humility, isn't it?
It's the purest form, you could say.
But then we grow up.
And we start to lose that.
We think we know everything.
We build up these walls of ego.
And that's when things get tricky.
Dr. Dinani talks about this.
Oh, right. Disguise pride.
Yes. It's like we use humility as a mask.
A manipulation tactic almost.
Exactly. Fishing for compliments.
Oh, or avoiding responsibility.
Putting on a show for others.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's like those people who say,
Oh, I'm so bad at this.
but they're really hoping you'll disagree.
They want that reassurance.
It's all about the ego underneath.
And that contradicts true humility.
So how do we know if we're falling into that trap?
Saadi says honest self-assessment is key.
So we need to be honest with ourselves.
About our strengths and weaknesses.
Without judgment.
That's the hard part.
It is. It's so easy to get caught up in our own,
Narratives.
our own stories about ourselves.
Then we can lose sight of the truth.
But that's what Saadi's pushing us towards, right?
Towards that honest self-reflection.
And that's where the paradox comes in, right?
The connection between humility and arrogance.
Okay. So how does he explain that?
Well, he draws on the Islamic creation stories.
Oh, okay.
Humans are created from dust.
Representing humility.
Right. And the devil from fire.
Fire.
Symbolizing destruction.
So we've got dust and fire within us.
That duality.
That's intense.
It's a powerful metaphor.
It really is. So is fire always a bad thing?
Not necessarily.
Oh.
Think of passion,
Oh,
creativity, drive.
that fire can be a force for good.
The key is learning to manage it.
So it's not about extinguishing the fire.
No, it's about channeling it wisely.
That's a helpful distinction.
Yeah.
And you know what this reminds me of? Something you mentioned earlier about the heart.
Oh, yes, the philosophers.
Yeah, what did they say about that?
Well, Dr. Larijani suggests the heart can be a dwelling place for evil.
Oh, wow.
But Dr. Dinani says it's also the throne of God,
So it's both.
that battleground within us.
So are we just stuck in this tug of war?
Not at all. Dr. Dinani emphasizes choice.
Choice.
He quotes the Quran, but some are grateful and some are ungrateful.
So we have agency.
We can choose which path to follow.
I like that. That's empowering.
It is. We're not victims of our circumstances.
So true humility is about recognizing our capacity for both
Good and evil, dust and fire.
and choosing a path of compassion.
Yes. And that's where Saadi's image of polishing the mirror of the heart comes in.
Polishing the mirror. What does that mean?
It's about self-awareness, seeing ourselves clearly.
Flaws and all of
Exactly.
it. That takes courage.
It does, but it's essential for growth.
And you know what else I think is important for cultivating humility? Gratitude.
Oh, absolutely.
When we focus on what we're grateful for,
It shifts our perspective.
instead of focusing on what we lack.
We see the abundance around us.
And that makes it harder to be arrogant.
It humbles us naturally.
So gratitude is like an antidote to pride.
a powerful antidote.
I love that. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into Saadi's wisdom so far.
It really has. And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know. There's so much more to explore.
There is. And I think it's time to shift gears a little bit and explore the other side of this coin.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What do you have in mind?
Well, we've talked a lot about humility.
Yeah.
But Saadi also had a lot to say about arrogance.
I see where you're going with it.
Particularly how it manifests.
And the consequences it can have.
Exactly. I think it would be fascinating to delve into that a bit further.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. It's like looking at the flip side of the coin.
And it might help us understand humility even more deeply.
That's what I'm hoping for. Remember at the beginning how you mentioned that Saadi explores this paradoxical relationship between humility and arrogance.
I do.
Well, let's unravel that paradox a bit further.
I'm game. Let's dive in.
Okay, so where do we begin?
One of the first things that stands out in Saadi's work is this connection he makes between arrogance and a lack of self-awareness.
Okay, so arrogant people are basically
blind to their own flaws.
They don't see themselves clearly.
Not at all. They have this distorted view.
It's like they're looking in a funhouse mirror.
And thinking that's what they actually look like.
Wow. Yeah, I can see that. And that can lead to all sorts of problems, right? So what are some of the consequences of this kind of arrogance?
Well, for one, it can damage relationships.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I mean, who wants to be around someone
who's constantly bragging,
putting others down,
refusing to admit their mistakes?
It's exhausting.
It really is. You just want to run away.
Exactly. Arrogance creates a wall.
It prevents genuine connection.
It's like they're constantly trying to prove
that they're better than everyone else.
And that leaves no room for authentic connection.
And I imagine it also hinders personal growth.
Oh, absolutely.
If you think you're already perfect.
Why would you bother trying to improve?
Exactly. There's no room for growth.
Without that humility.
But here's what I find so fascinating.
What's that?
Arrogance isn't always obvious.
You're right. It can be very subtle.
It's not always about bragging or being loud.
Sometimes it hides behind a mask.
Of politeness or even charm.
Oh, yes, very true.
So how do we spot this subtle arrogance?
Saadi gives us some clues.
Oh, good. I'm all ears.
Well, one example is dismissing other people's opinions.
Oh, those people who always have to.
Have the last word.
Yes.
Ah.
They can't even imagine that someone else might be right.
Their need to be right is paramount.
It shuts down any real dialogue.
And that closed-mindedness.
That's a form of arrogance, right?
Absolutely.
It's like saying, my view is the only one that matters.
And that's incredibly damaging.
To relationships.
And our own growth.
It cuts us off from other perspectives.
From the richness of human experience.
What else? What other forms of subtle arrogance should we watch out for?
Saadi also warns us about taking credit for things we didn't actually do.
Oh yeah, that's a classic one.
It's all about inflating our ego.
At the expense of others.
Exactly. Taking credit for someone else's work.
It happens all the time.
In the workplace, in families.
Even in friendships.
It's a subtle way of undermining others.
And asserting our own superiority.
And it creates resentment.
Oh yeah, big time. It erodes trust.
And it can be a slippery slope.
Once you start down that path.
It's hard to turn back.
So how do we avoid falling into these traps?
Well, it takes constant vigilance.
And self-awareness.
Exactly. And that's where those practices we talked about earlier come in.
You mean self-reflection, seeking feedback?
Service to others, gratitude.
They're all antidotes to arrogance.
Powerful antidotes.
They help us stay grounded.
Connected to something bigger than ourselves.
And you know what else I think is important?
What's that?
A sense of humor.
Oh, I love that.
Learning to laugh at ourselves.
Because it can be so liberating.
It takes the sting out of our ego.
And makes room for humility.
So it's okay to not take ourselves too seriously.
Saadi certainly didn't.
He used humor to expose arrogance.
He reminded us that we're all just
flawed human beings.
trying our best.
And it's okay to laugh at that.
It's a sign of humility.
Wow, this is all so insightful. I'm learning so much.
Me too. Saadi's wisdom is truly profound.
It is. So what does this all mean for us?
I think it means that humility is a journey.
Not a destination.
And it's a journey worth taking.
Even if we stumble along the way.
Absolutely.
So what are some key takeaways from Saadi's teachings that we can apply to our own lives?
Well, I think it's about recognizing our place in the grand scheme of things.
Our interconnectedness with all beings.
Approaching life with an open heart.
And a willingness to learn and grow.
Choosing compassion over judgment.
Service over self-interest.
Gratitude over entitlement.
And embracing our imperfections.
Laughing at ourselves.
Remembering that we're all in this together.
Beautifully said.
You know what's striking me now is that Saadi's teachings are not just about personal transformation.
Yeah, right.
They're about creating a better world.
A more just and compassionate world.
It's about recognizing that our individual journeys towards humility
Are connected to the well-being of the collective.
So when we cultivate humility within ourselves,
We contribute to a more harmonious world.
it's a powerful reminder that our actions have ripple effects.
They do.
So Saadi's message is incredibly relevant today.
Maybe even more than ever.
We need humility now more than ever.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been a truly enriching deep dive into Saadi's wisdom on humility and arrogance.
It has been a joy exploring these ideas with you.
And I hope our listeners feel inspired to continue their own exploration
And these concepts.
and to put them into practice in their own lives.
Absolutely.
So join us next time as we continue to uncover the gems of wisdom hidden within Saadi's work.
We'll pick up right where we left off, exploring even more about arrogance and how we can work towards genuine humility.
Until then, thank you for joining us on Wisdom Unveiled.
It's a journey, and it's not always easy.
You're right about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be especially tough when the world around us seems to value the opposite of humility.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Like everywhere you look, it's all about self-promotion
Yeah.
and competition
It's a constant bombardment.
and getting ahead at all costs.
Yeah, it can be hard to stay grounded in those values of humility.
It can make you wonder if it's even possible to live like this, in the real world.
That's a question we all grapple with, I think.
It's one thing to read about humility in a book.
Right, but to actually live it.
In a world that often celebrates the opposite.
It's a challenge for sure.
It is. It feels like swimming upstream sometimes.
I think Saadi understood that.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. He didn't live in an ivory tower.
That's right. He experienced life firsthand.
The joys, the sorrows, the successes, the failures.
He was right there in the thick of it.
Exactly. Navigating the same complexities that we all face.
So he wasn't preaching from some lofty, unattainable perspective.
Not at all. He was right there in the trenches with us.
And that's why his teachings feel so practical and relatable.
He's not asking us to be perfect.
He's just saying,
Hey,
we're all human,
we're going to mess up
but we can keep striving
to do better.
to make those small choices.
That move us in the direction of humility.
It's about progress, not perfection.
I love that progress, not perfection.
And it starts with those everyday interactions.
You mean those seemingly insignificant moments?
Exactly. The ones where we have a choice to choose humility over ego.
That's where the real work happens.
It's those micro moments of humility.
The little things that add up over time.
I like that. So what are some examples of those micro moments?
Well, Dr. Larijani gives a great example.
Oh, I'm all ears.
He talks about listening attentively to someone who has a different opinion than us
Okay.
without interrupting.
We're trying to prove them wrong.
That can be a powerful act of humility.
Just listening.
It sounds simple,
It does.
but it can be incredibly challenging.
Especially when our egos are involved.
We want to be right.
We want to have the last word.
But true humility is about
Putting our ego aside,
making space for another perspective,
even when it's difficult.
even when we disagree.
That's true humility in action.
It's a practice,
Something we have to work at.
like a muscle,
We have to strengthen it.
through consistent effort.
And it's those daily choices
Those little acts of humility,
that ultimately shape who we become
they plant the seeds.
for a more humble and compassionate life.
And a more just and compassionate world.
Because it's not just about us as individuals, right?
It's about the collective.
Our interconnectedness.
Saadi often compared humility to water.
Oh, really?
He said, just as water nourishes the earth and makes it fertile, humility nourishes the soul and makes it receptive to wisdom.
I love that imagery.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
And you know what's interesting about water?
What's that?
It always seeks the lowest point. It doesn't try to force its way,
It flows.
adapting to its surroundings.
That's a powerful metaphor for humility.
It is. So true humility isn't about putting ourselves above others.
It's about recognizing our common humanity.
Our interconnectedness.
We're all in this together.
I love that. And even though Saadi lived centuries ago,
His message feels so relevant today.
maybe even more so,
We live in a world that often celebrates ego and self-promotion,
it's easy to get swept up in that.
to forget the importance of humility.
So how do we resist that pull
How do we stay grounded in those values?
when the world is telling us to do the opposite?
That's the challenge we all face.
It is. But I think Saadi would remind us
That true strength lies in recognizing our interconnectedness,
in serving something larger than ourselves
approaching life with an open heart,
and a willingness to learn.
That's where true humility begins. It's a journey toward a different kind of strength.
A deeper strength
It's an inner strength.
that comes from connecting with something greater than our ego.
Exactly.
Wow, I really love that idea. That's what makes Saadi's teaching so powerful.
They offer us a different way of being.
A path to greater peace and fulfillment.
And connection.
It's not always easy.
But it's worth striving for.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Saadi's wisdom,
Yeah.
what are some of the key things that stand out to you?
You know, it really struck me. The idea that arrogance can be so subtle.
Right.
It's not always about being loud or boastful.
It's those everyday interactions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The way we listen or don't listen.
How we take credit or fail to give credit
It's those blind spots where our ego can sneak in.
without us even realizing it.
And that's why self-awareness is so important.
We need to be vigilant,
Constantly checking ourselves.
making sure we're not falling into those traps of arrogance.
And that's where those practices we talked about come in.
Self-reflection, seeking feedback, service to others.
Gratitude, forgiveness, humor.
They're not just about cultivating humility.
And they're also about guarding against arrogance.
It's like we're equipping ourselves for that battle in the heart
The struggle between dust and fire.
when we're choosing our weapons.
Compassion, service, gratitude.
Forgiveness, humor,
These are the tools that help us cultivate true humility.
and combat arrogance.
And remember this journey toward humility.
It's not just about personal transformation,
It's about creating a better world.
a more just and compassionate world.
It's recognizing that we're all part of this web of life.
And our actions have ripple effects.
So Saadi's message is more relevant than ever.
We need humility now more than ever.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into Saadi's wisdom on humility and arrogance.
It has been a joy exploring these ideas with you.
And I hope our listeners feel inspired to continue their own exploration
Of these concepts.
and to put them into practice in their own lives.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on Wisdom Unveiled. Until next time, may your hearts be filled with humility, your minds open to wisdom, and your actions guided by compassion.